Oh. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
You can head in?
Yeah, Baruch Hashem.
Okay, great.
Good morning, Chevra. Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. A second, guys. All right. A minute. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 prakim Rambam, Hilchos, Maacholos, asuros, prakim Ches, Tes, and Yud. We are beginning with Perek Ches. Perek Ches is the Perek that teaches us about the Gid Hanasha. We're going to learn how do we know when the Torah says don't eat something? Does it mean just don't eat? Or does it mean don't eat and don't even have Hana'ah? That will be the big klal that Rambam is going to give, as well as learning the important rule of kol haparush miruba parush. However, kol kavua is kemachza al machza. Perek Ches has 18 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph says that Gid hanasha noyeg both by behema v'chaya hatohoiden va'afilu b'nevelus utreif shalahem. That's the beauty here. Every chapter, every din has other applications. Sometimes only to behema v'chayis tohiras and not to other problems here, no matter what, but it has to be pure. In other words, if an animal is not kosher, the concept of ein isur halal isur, you can't have the gid anosha because you're having a behema tameya. You understand? The noyeg b'shalil, it even applies to a fetus. It applies to animals that are hegdish. Ben kachim manachalim, ben kachim she'ena manachalim. Furthermore, when it comes to this Gid Hanoshem, the whole Maacholos and Tanoim, is it both sides? Is it one side? That Rambam paskins that v'noyeg both by Yorech Shal Yamin and by Yorech Shal Smoil. However, it only applies only the gid, only the sinew that's mamish on the hip socket, as it says in Parshas Vayishlach Asher al kaf hayorech, which means if it's not on the hip socket, Abul Shara gid, both the part of this gid that is l'mayla min hakaf and b'shalamata at soifai. Furthermore, the chelev, that's also the fats that are on this gid, eina asur ela medivrei soifrim. Another detail, ushnei gidim heim, there is the inner one that is close to the bone. That is the one that's asur min hatayra, like the Rambam says, both the right and the left. The ha'elyon kulai is taka asur only medivrei soifrim. Okay, halacha beis. And these are all things that when you see, you'll know exactly what the Rambam is talking about, but we're learning the halachas. The punishment is loika. Being that this is only asin midrabanan, makanoisi makasmardos. Another rule, the kamashir achila, for you to get flogged, even the makasmardos, or for you to be violating loika midairaisa, kazaydas. Now, ve'im ochel agid she'ala kaf kuloi, afal pi she'ein boy kazayis. Here is also where you're going to get malchus mepnei shu kibiria b'fnei atzmai. Very much as we learned by Shiratz. Halacha gimel. Ochel kazayis migid anosha shal yimin. And you also ate a kazayis from the gid anosha shal smoil. Or, like we just mentioned, the concept of bidia b'fnei atzma applies just to the gid. Even though neither of them had a kazayis, it's considered two separate violations, and therefore loika shumainim. And v'chein hu loika al kol gid v'gid. Some people don't have this one line, or we have it in the Chayenu. I don't know if you have it in your Rambam. Halacha dalet ha'oif ein by mishum gid hanash. Even though this gid is by the bird, but since she'ein loik kaf yerach, since it doesn't have a rounded hip socket, by the animal, by the bird, I mean, it's long, it's flat. So that's why it's understood that it is excluded from the lav. However, interestingly, then in the Gemara, it's a boy ifshata, and the Rambam paskins that hagid shaloi asur, asur not midrabanan, because it's a suffix isur doiraisa, and therefore, like any other suffix isur doiraisa, you can't do it. But if you did it, the aim loikin of chein behema. Likewise, that shekaf yerecha is similar to that of a bird. It's aruch kishaloif. Gid hanasha shalah is also, that's also a boy de leifshata. So we're saying that l'chumra you can eat it by suffix doiraisa, but the aim loikin of. Halacha 5. Ha'oichel gid hanasha mi behema v'chaya hatmeim. If it's some non-kosher species, so the Rambam says patur. Furthermore, that's the chiddush. Not only are you going to be pater because it's a behema tameya, but really the gid is not food. Why? Because so you're going to be completely exempt from malchus. However, yeah, then and what's the psara here? It's included in the law of not eating behema temeya, so you're going to get malchus. Not malchus because of chelev, malchus from behema temeya. Very good. And as the Rambam began in Halacha Aleph, if it is from a species that's the Haydim, then the Isur of Gidanash is also on an Avela, or of a Treifa, or let's say of a Karban Oila, you're going to be Chayiv Shtayim. Now this is called the Isur Koilo, which means that when the animal was born, you already cannot have the Gid Hanash. Then, if the animal later becomes nevela, guys. So the gid anosha only does not allow you to eat that gid, but the rest of the animal theoretically can be edible. When the animal then turns nevela, when the animal later turns treifa, if the animal later is consecrated as an oila, so that isur nevela treifa is chal on all of the animal, isur koilo. So that's why we do say it's chal, so it's also chal on the gid. So chayiv shtayim, mitoich shenichlal beisur sha'ar gufa shoya muter. Therefore, that's called isur koilo. Nichlal gamagid v'noisev olav isur acher. Halach zayin. Hanoitel gid anosh. When the menaker is removing this gid, he has to go, tunneling after it. Even though the Rambam says that midoiraisa, only the inner one, only the one that's on top of the hip socket, but midrabanan, all of it is us. The aim, the neman hatabach al gid hanosha keshem shneman ala chaylev. Now, the aim loichim basimi kol tabach. Only such a person who that shoich la'atzmai u'moicher and v'neman. But if a person is not muchzik b'kashrus, then you have to have one person shachting and another person selling. Halacha ches. That you have to know that this person is a muhzak, that it's Israel. When Bisman Shekula li Yisrael, at that time, Gavaldik Yidden had a much higher standard, like Chindi Kol Adam, because everyone was given this presumption that they know how to do this. Halacha tes. And as we finished yesterday's third Pedic, and now the Nimsa Basa Nevela, Basa Treifa. So first of all, there's a din of the moment. He sold something that we never would have bought. Machzer es hadamim laba'al. The Rambam doesn't speak about whether the buyer has to return the meat. I know that in Shulchan Aruch, the din is that if he sold him something that's not kosher biblically, even if the meat is no longer here, the money has to be returned. That's how we paskin. If what he sold him was asur only with Rabbanan, then he only has to return the money if the item is returned to the seller. The Rambam doesn't speak about this. So first of all, give back the money. Number two here, yesterday we learned about flogging. Now we're learning about you put him into a ban. And now, does tshuva ever help? So says that the only way for him to regain back his cheskas kashrus is for him to move to a place where no one knows. And for him, not in our location where he's doing things that are great to prove to the oilam, because everyone is looking at him with suspicious eyes. It's a paradox. He can't prove anything. He's only doing it because people are pointing a finger on him, so he's going to behave extraordinarily good. But if he goes to a place where no one knows him, he doesn't have to prove anything. And yet, so we see that money reasons won't deviate him off the path of the Torah. Or when he shachts for himself and he's going to declare something treifa, even though it's going to bring upon him a great money loss. And again, he's not living in a place where people have all their eyes on him. That's a sign that he did tshuva, shavadi yasa tshuva, b'loi haram. He's not trying to deceive us. And in other words, if you have a suffix, just to know, then on one hand, we have to have the balance. When you look at a yid, every yid has a cheskas kashrus. But when you marry them, you got to find out whether they're Jewish or not. You understand? When you buy meat from them, in the past this person sold treifa meat as kosher, then you're not allowed to give him that presumption, and you may not buy meat from him. The latter, the Amaretz that's delivering it, is believed to say, I bought it from that butcher. Which is why we won't allow him to be the menaker. But if he is only the shliach bringing it, we're not a chosheshin that he bought something kosher and then he exchanged it. Furthermore, Bafilo Abdi Yisrael and Ba'amoiseyem Nemana Medavar Zeh Avaloi Goyim. Now we're starting to touch on the Basa Shena Salomon Ayim. We are afraid, since they don't live b'chlal in the world of kashrus, that even if it's emes that they bought it from a kosher butcher. But how do you know that that is the meat that they're giving to you? Shema Yachlif, he might have exchanged it with his own meat and you won't know. Okay. Now that we said that the meat that's delivered to you has to go through the hands of a Neman, and if not, you have doubts. So that's the lead away, that's the lead in to the famous Eser Chanuyos. And this is the ground zero of, on one hand, we have a rule that we follow the majority, and there's a Gzeirus HaKosov, that if the doubt comes to our attention, while the item that we have a doubt about is in its makom kavua, we don't follow a majority. We always view it as 50-50. So here we go. When there are 10 stores, 9 of them are selling basar shchuta. One of them is selling basar nevela. Now, you bought meat from one of them, and while you were buying meat, you were distracted. You were listening to a shear. And you don't remember which store you walked into. Now, about it today, everything is marked, everything is packaged. It wasn't packaged in those days. And the meats look the same. You have no idea which store you bought it out, even though 9 of them are basar shchuta. So you would argue, well, roiv, you probably walked into a store that's kosher. We don't say that. Now, guys, you are aware of the doubt when you're outside the store, but it's called kavua, because your doubt is, where did I buy it? In which store? The stores are kavua. And it's considered a something d'oraisa. And therefore, if the issue was whether it's kosher or not kosher, mid'oraisa, you may not eat it. In contrast, if the meat was found out in the street, you became aware of this meat out there. Now, you know that it did originate somewhere, but you did not take it from there. Now you want to know, from what store did this meat come from? Here is where we say haloich or haleich achar haroiv, meaning im hayorev hamoichem goyim asur, im hayorev Israelim muter, because called a parish midu parish. And mamish, and based on that you eat it. Halacha yud beis. The chein basar animsa biyad goy. Im hayu moichrei habasar Yisrael, which means, where did the guy get it from? The guy got it from a yid. You are aware of this meat when it's in the hand of the guy, when it's outside its source, then mutter. Says the Rambam zeldin Torah. However, whether it's found bashuk, even though you have this rule of kol haparish meruba parish, or if you find it in the hand of the guy, if in this neighborhood the majority of meat sellers are selling kosher meat, even if all of them are yid, wow, then you leave it in your house. Then it's also us. Either there's it's clear simon, or even if you have tevias ayin, which means that when you look at it, you can recognize, there was a crack here, there was something that you can't pinpoint, but this is yours. And by the way, guys, when it comes to returning a lost article, the mashal, if the person who lost it is claiming, I know it, that it's mine, but tvias ayin, we only give naamanus to a Talmud Chacham. That's when it comes to monetary things. When it comes to isurim, eidach nemen b'isurim. Who makiroi vaday shuhuzem, or obviously if it's tzarur and chasam, it's bound and sealed. And that's the whole sugya that we have. There was a time, right, that the ravens, they brought meat from the palace of the king that was searching the Navi, but there is this rabbinic concept of basar shenasalam min ha'ayin, which really makes even people today here. We have the leaders and people that are in the food business. When you make an order, it's not so pashut. When they ship the food to you, it has to be both sarur v'chasam for you to be allowed to eat it. Even though tvias ayin, that this comes from leaders because it's the best food in the world, doesn't work that way. You got to have both sarur and chasam. Halacha yud gimel. Tala kli malei chatichas bas. Right? There is a container that's hanging. Nishbar akli v'nafla chatichas la'aretz. Uba umatza, when you find it on the ground. Ve'en b'em simim le'tvias ayin. We say the very fact that you found it on the ground, hareza asu. Because on the ground, it could be that a chayala, a rodent, took the meat that fell, and either there's meat, maybe it's other meat. This is all part of the basar shenasalam min ha'ayin. Halacha yud dalet. Gid hanasha, moving on, is mutter b'hana. Lefikach mutar la'adam l'shleich l'nachri yarech shigid hanasha b'teicha. Now, there's a layer. The layer here is maybe we should be afraid that this guy will then sell it to a yid. He's going to tell the yid, I got it as a gift from a Jewish guy that eats kosher. We don't have that chashash as long as the entire thigh is closed. He should give it to him when it's closed with Bnei Yisrael. Mekaymer means that if the gid would have been removed, you would have noticed it. So when you see that this thigh is not cut open, you know it was not cut open. So it's known that the Jew gifted it to the guy without removing it. If a yid owns a thigh that's cut open and he did not remove the gid, until he removes the gid. Because then a person will say, I saw the owner gifting it to the guy, I saw it cut with the false presumption that the kit was removed. So therefore you can only gift it to a guy if you properly remove it. Halacha tezvah. This is a very important klal when it comes to interpreting Torah Shabbat. What does Hashavi? This is what Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu. Kol mokem shneva b'Torah. Lo yisoichel. Do not eat. Lo yisoichlu, you shall not eat in the plural. Lo yoichlu, they shall not eat. Lo yoichel, it shall not be eaten. All of these expressions by default means echad isra chila ve'echad isra amna b'mashma. Not eating means not having benefit. Only if the Torah then is matir hana. What does it say in the nevela? Don't eat nevela. And right afterwards it says, but you are allowed to give it to the ger, or like if that's in Parshas today, or like we have in Parshas Sav concerning chela, that why did the Torah have to say that you can use the chela for anything other than eating? The fact that Torah needed to say that you are allowed to have anah means that if not for that, even though the Torah only said lo yisoichal, lo yeyachel, it automatically means hana as well. Or like we find by shkatzim and amatzim and v'dam and evim and achai and gidanasha. No, it's not that we have this cloud. Don't eat means unless you are told otherwise by God. Don't have hana. By gidanasha, nothing is written that it's mutar b'hana, but that's part of the Torah shalapeh. Shekolelu mutar b'hana because we have that following Kabbalah. That obviously they are Asura Machilon. Halacha Tezayin, Kol Michael Shu Asur Banon. Imnen Veloy Achal. For example, a person violated, he sold it, he gave it to a guy, it's also Hana, because the guy owes you a favor back. Or Leklavim, for that violation, Malchus is for violating by eating. However, but the money that you got wrongfully is mutter. I want you to know if you violated that, the money is not bad. Now comes a very important rule. Mutter does not mean that you can make your livelihood by selling non-kosher. Or and as the Rambam will explain in a moment, if a person is a trapper and they trap also non-kosher animals, that's not their kavanah, then they could sell it. You can't purposefully get into the business of non-kosher foods, right? Even though it's mutar b'hana, and the only exception is chelev, where not only is it mutar b'hana, but the fact that Torah writes yei asa v'chol malacha, that means that you can even do business by selling. And therefore, many times Eden were given opportunities to buy the privately owned supermarket chains. Big part of the section of the supermarket is to sell non-kosher food, and they didn't do so because of this halach. Halacha Yud Zayin. Now, if you are a trapper, so you know what goes into the trap, whatever God sends in there. Chaya oif the dog. And it's in your net. Sometimes you only trap non-kosher. Sometimes you trap both. Here the Rambam says, since you didn't have kavana, mutar l'machron, avol lo yichavin melachta latamei. Another din, umutar lasis chayra b'cholav shechol v'goy ve'en yisrael re'eyu u'b'gvinas hagoyim v'chayoytze behem, which are asur midrabanan. So first of all, anything that's asur midrabanan is allowed. You can do chayra with it. But there is a chiddush with the cholav and the gvina. What's the chiddush? Because we learned yesterday, I know it's a rabbanan, but it's a rabbanan because maybe you mixed in there chalei behematamea. There's like a suffix d'oraisa. So you would argue, if it's a suffix d'oraisa, then you should also not be allowed to do business with it. But we don't view it that way, because even though the Chazal made a takana regarding cholav akum, cholav stam, gvina sakum, the possibility, even then, for a goy to mix on something tummy is very little. So it's considered the bona fide gezerah de rabban. And the final halacha yudches, zeh haklal. We have to remember this. This is my halacha lamais. We pass in this way. Kol sheisurim in ha'toira osur lasis b'schayra. Kol sheisurim in devreya mutzar lasis b'schayra. Not only that, bein b'sfeker, bein b'vadoy. Just to know the last line of the Rambam, people get trapped. It means that by isurei toira, when we say that you may not do business with it, it means even if there is a proper suffix midoiraisa. And again, to point out, that's the chiddush, right? The Rambam brings in cholav akum and givina sakum, even though the reason was of that chashash, but it's not considered a suffix. It's considered the isur derabanan, which is why you are allowed to do business. You can sell cholav akum. All right, moving on. Chavre Pedic Tes. Pedic Tes is gavaldik. Now we're going to the isur of basar b'cholav, which is going to lead us into the dinim of bittul. We're going to learn about not barnat lehetera, not barnat leisura. We're going to learn about when there is a mixture. It doesn't always mean that all of it becomes not good. Sometimes you resolve it by only rinsing it off. It's called hadacha. Other times there's something called kidei klipa. You have to remove a layer, but not all of it. We're going to learn about the weighting, whether it is what you need to do between milk and meat. Shitas Rambam, that's very lenient. Mamish. Forget about what we do al pi Kabbalah. I'm talking about, we'll see in the Rambam, and what do you need to do between meat and milk. And without further ado, Chaver Pedic Tes says the big Pedic 28 halachas. Halacha al Zok the Rambam. Basar b'cholav asur levashloi. Number one. Number two, if it was cooked together, v'asur la'achloi min ha'toira. Number three, v'asur b'hana'a. What do you do with it? You should bury it. And the afroi, if you burnt it, and now there are ashes, are also asur ke'efer kol hanikbarim. And that's the whole sugya, right? Some things have to be burnt, some things have to be buried. Yesh bozeh ma she'ein bozeh. That which needs to be buried because even burning it doesn't take away the isur. Ad kedei kach, it's asur. Now, when people learn this line, they get stuck for a moment. So we're going to follow how we interpret this liner. That Rambam is trying to emphasize that you're going to be chayiv, not when you have a kazayis, both from the basar and from the chol. Even if only together you have a kazayis, that's what the Rambam is saying over here, and you cook zusammen, that means half of meat, half of milk, then you like it. Shenemar, that's an ayah that you get malchus just for the cooking. And you're also going to be chayiv malchus. Even though you did not do the cooking, separate. Halacha base. You can ask a kasha, how can you say you chayiv malchus for eating? Nuvu state doesn't say don't eat, it says don't cook. So the Rambam says, yeah, God did not have to say don't eat, because God said don't even cook. That's what Hashem means. The Torah, when it comes to the many arroyos, the Torah, imagine, never explicitly said that a person cannot have an act of bia with his daughter. Why? Because since the Torah wrote the daughter's daughter, and that is included daughter. So similarly, included in bishul is achil, and therefore yechayiv malchus. That's not called onshel min adin. It's not a kal v'chomer. It's included in the vish. Halacha gimel. Ein osir ben atoyra elo. Another important rule. Psar behema tohira. The meat has to be from a species that's tohira. The Rambam is not saying meat from an animal that was slaughtered kahalacha. No, it has to be from a species that's tohira. B'chalev behema tohira. So, for example, if a Jew, God forbid, the shoygig, of course, will have a Big Mac, right? So, mistama, right? They say it's horse meats, whatever they put on over there. And hopefully, at least they're not violating basar b'chalav. You understand? Because they are violating Yisur, they're not eating kosher meat. But if the species is not tohirim, there's no Yisur regarding the cooking and eating it mitzad basar b'chalav. And that's what we learned from Leisavashal Gedi B'Chalev Imoy. In other words, we know it doesn't limit this only to the kid. It doesn't limit it only with the kid and the mother's milk. God forbid, the Karoim learned that way. Gedi B'Chalev Imoy is telling you kosher species. That's all it means. Gedi hu koilol vlad hashoyt, vlad haset, vlad ha'etz. Now, there are times that the Torah is dafka speaking about goats. There, the Torah uses the words gediism. And another thing, when we're saying the gedi, which means all of the behemoths, b'chalev imoy, it doesn't mean in its mother's milk. It can be in any milk from a kosher species. Why did the Torah say chalev imoy? So we say al pi nigla ela shediber akosav bohaiva. There are other mystical answers, but let's go on. Halot vayt. Avol psar behema tohira. Even if one of them was from a kosher species, but it was cooked, b'chalei behema tameyo, other faker, you have b'sar behema tameyo, and it was cooked in cow's milk. Those one of the two was not from a kosher species. Muter levasho, or muter bahanoa. It's taka asu, but that's only an isra achila. The ein chayav al achila say mishum basar b'chalav. Halacha dalet chein basar chayav oiv. If it's both from a chayim, it means gedi excludes chayas, just like gedi excludes biblically birds, fowls. Bein b'chalev behema, bein b'chalev chaya means if you take a kosher giraffe and you cook it even b'chalev chaya, ein also b'chilam and atoyra, and therefore mutar lavashloi or mutar bana. The isur that the Chazal made was only on eating. And why? Kedei shelo yifshu ha'am, and v'yavoyu lo the isur basar b'chalav shel toira, and they're going to eat basar toira b'chalev toira. Sharei ein mashma ha'kosov el gedi b'chalev imay mamish. That's what people will erroneously say. Lefikach asru kol basar b'chalav. But since the pasuk without the Torah Shabbat is so confusing, if people will end up eating basar chaya b'chalav or chicken with chalav, then they're going to say even basar b'chalav if it's not mamish gedi b'chalavim. Halacha. However, that gzeira derabanan is only for basar chaya, basar oik, but dagim or chagavim mutar la'achlan b'chalav. Very good. So the fish and the milk that Rambam Bechlal doesn't have at all. Hashoichet oif. And in the oif you have already completed eggs. So the din is that even that mutar la'achlan b'chalav, because we don't consider these eggs to be a bird. A bird is not similar to rabbanan, and even though the eggs are in the bird, it's okay. It's separated. And it's completed, and there is a shell. Halacha vav. Now, what is cooking? Let's go into cooking. Where's tzemach? What about smoking? So smoking is smoking cooking. Hamavashal b'chamei tiveri. You're cooking it, but the fire, it's not told us eish, like we learned in Al Shabbos. The Chayotzim says that Rambam ein loikin olav. And by the way, it means you're not chayv malchus, not for the bishul, and therefore, if someone ate it, they're not going to be chayv malchus for the eating. Oh, it's not awesome midayis. What is mecholov? In we. Where's Danny? He's going to wake up in a second. Oi, bachalev meso.
Way, you got it right.
Way. Now, guys, here, remember this for later. Chalev mesa means there was milk found inside an animal after the animal died. What the Rambam doesn't say, but he is including in this, and remember this, it's called chalev shchuta. In other words, not milk, the milk that's in the animal, not only if you shechted it, even if it's dead, oy b'chalev zachar, but some men, today, the world is today meshuga, maybe just to explain the Rambam, the Azamatzias, oy shebishul dam, not meat, dam b'chalav. See, in all of this, patur, you're not violating the bishul, and therefore, obviously, you're going to be chayv malchus for many other issues, right? For eating dam, we're speaking about basar b'chalav. Avol hamavashel b'sar mesa, oy chelav, right? Fats. V'chayotze b'hem b'chalav loika al bishulay. Eating not because ain't isur halal isur, but there's no isur regarding cooking all nevelas and treifas. So for bishul, the isur of bishul is halal. Interesting. The ain't loika al chilasem shavasa b'chalav. Because ein isur halal isur, like we just said, she'ein isur basa b'chalav chal al isur b'vela, or an isur chaylev. The only way isur is chal an isur that we just learned this last week. One of the three, basachas, koilel, or moisef, and none of them are over here. She'ein kan lo isur, koilel lo isur, moisef lo isur basachas. Halacha 7. Hamavashal shalol b'chalav. A person cooks a fetus in milk. The din is chayav. A shalil is part of the gedi. And therefore, if someone ate it, same person, another person, just for the eating, you're going to be chayv malchus. However, if someone cooks a placenta, or the datzams, or the ikre kanayim, utuflayim, or rakim becholav, this is not considered meat, even though these hooves are soft, putter, and therefore, because whenever there's an isur bishul, there's an isur achil. Now we're moving on, my friends, to the dinim of bittul halacha ches. Basar shenafal l'toich hachalav. It happens, meat falls into milk, or milk falls into meat, and they got cooked together. So now the shear is benois and tam. What does that mean? Keitzad chaticha shel basar shenafal l'kedera, and the kedera is filled with boiling milk, and you take out the meat. Toyam hagoy es hakedera. The goy is going to taste the milk, and the Rambam doesn't mention that this guy has to be, like the Gemara says, a kefela aroma'a. Means Chazal speak about a guy that's a mumcha, and there's like a mirses, like he's a chef. He's going to say it doesn't taste like meat. So, we trust him. The Rambam, and that's why he has the manas. Many are medayik, and the Rambam, that for this, you don't have to have that special mirses. Every guy will be neman. That's what they say, the lashon here. Any guy will taste. Imam sheyesh v'tam basar asura. It's like a milsa david legiloyes. And that's what you believe in, maybe. The imlav muteres. So that's regarding the pot. The oisa chaticha that's permeated with milk is going to be us. When is it shaykh to taste, guys? This is going to be the word over here. When a piece of meat falls in there, what is the guy trying to taste when he's tasting the pot? He wants to taste that if in the milk he's toyim tambos. I have a problem. What's my problem? The Rambam doesn't give time. I don't know this man. But if the meat lingered in the pot for a certain amount of time, which means that the milk that's in the meat, that milk is already basar b'chalav. Some of that milk went back into the pot. You're not going to taste that. You won't be able to taste the tam of the milk that is basar b'chalav milk. Elama, we have a klal that whenever there's mixtures between two substances, when the ratio is 60 against 1, not 59 and 1. By Dina Doiraisa, it's 60 and 1, a total of 61, then it's bottom. You'll need that over here. Avalim Leisila, like we explained, so now that the tam of the milk, that's asura, went back into the pot of milk, the guy won't be able to taste it at all. The milk is milk. Now, Mishana Noisa Beshishim. That milk that's in the meat that stayed in there for a while because you left it in the pot for, it doesn't mean a minute, doesn't mean 10 seconds, doesn't mean a half an hour, I don't know. but that amount of time. That milk, right? And you can't be mafchin that milk because milk is milk. Okay, now let's go in the reverse. Now milk fell into a pot of meat. Here again. Now hold on, guys. What are we looking for? The milk fell on one piece of meat. So here also we have this differentiation of there'll be times that we look at the whole pot against the milk. There'll be times that we only look at the chaticha upon which the meat fell. So if it fell on a chaticha, start with that. If it doesn't have tam chalav, then everything is okay. That you are able to squeeze out that chaticha, and when you'll squeeze out the juice, now that chaticha is asur. Now let's take to the next step. Now that this chaticha is asur, it's in a pot. Now you have to have in the pot 60 against the chaticha, not 60 against the milk that fell in. Umesharin bekula, meaning im hoya bakoil sheyesh bekadeira. Hakoil means everything other than this chaticha. It doesn't only have to be meat. It can be other pieces of meat and the yorek and the morok and the tavlin, as long as in volume-wise, then that chaticha remains awesome if you can discern it, if you can identify it, and everything else is mutter. In other words, we are viewing the chaticha as a davar nifrod. And we don't say, 1 second, a little bit of milk fell into the pot. In the whole pot, there's shishim against the milk, you're good to go. We don't say that. But why don't we say that? Why are we viewing the piece of meat upon which milk fell as something separate? The Rambam explains in the next halach, when didn't steer the pot and it wasn't covered. That's why we view every piece in the pot as something separate. Now, he's not saying to be mavatal the isser, but if someone steered everything, mitchilav the whole time, mitchilav atzoy, mamish like we had before, I don't know the time, but this concept of that if right away it's mixed into everything, or you right away covered the pot from when it fell until when you're making this evaluation, now we say tam, which is a big leniency. You don't have to have shishim against the chaticha, you only have to have shishim against the milk. Falls into sauce, into soup, and you don't know which one. If you don't know which one, then lechatchila you can steer everything around. And now we say, and in other words, if you find a guy, always go with the guy, because it's possible that this milk was azah shvachim milk. Maybe there wasn't the ratio of 60 against 1. Maybe there was only 59 against 1. If there's no tam, it's going to be mutter. But if you don't have a guy, then you have to have that hashara of shishim. Bein baslo techalov, bein chalov tech basar, echad mishishim mutter, pachos mishishim asor. Right? Allah yudalef. Kedera shebishal basar. The pot. And now the pot is cleaned out. There's no meat in it. Nevertheless, lo yavashal b'chalov. And if you did cook milk in a fleishiga pot, then benoisin tam. In other words, same idea. If you have a goy, let the goy taste the milk. If he's toyam, the tam basar, and if not, misharin bishishim. Now let's go further. Next halach, kachal. Now, guys, in udder, we just learned that milk that's in the animal, we said in the shchuta, in the mesa, that milk is not milk midoy rice. Nevertheless, the Chachamim said that an udder is aser medivrei soifrim. Why again medivrei soifrim? Because she'ein basar she'en is bashal b'chalei shchuta aser v'natoli k'may shebiyarnu. In other words, just to make like this, there is tam of the udder in the cholov, but biblically it's not a problem. But rabbinically it's a problem. The problem is, again, the milk in it has some of the tam of the udder. So hakachal shekaroi umeda kecholov shabai. The problem is the milk. But if you cut it open and all of the milk that was in the animal when the animal was slaughtered, when the animal is going to be removed, now mutar litzaloisai ula achloi. Furthermore, if you tore it open, which is a better opening up, and on top of that, you press it into the wall until there is no moisture of the chalav, now you don't only are going to be allowed to eat the kachal. If you do tzilia, which is a better way of removing everything in it, here you can even be mavashal it and be mavashal with other meat. Gavaldik. As all of this is because the chalav in the udders, since it was there when the animal died, is not really biblically chalav. Now the kachal shaloi kara'oi, rabbinically it's a problem. Whether it was from an animal that never nursed before, ben shel katana, shaloi nika, ben shel gedayla, and a chanami. If you didn't tear it open, then asur lavashloi, bim avar bishlo tzayatzloi. So I guess if you cooked it just by itself, mutal achloi. But then you have to have mishaden oisei b'shishim. Now here's a very important klal, guys. Mishaden oisei b'shishim means 59 against 1. 59 against 1. The kachal is the one. In other words, it's one of the 60. And that's the rule, guys. Remember, Isura Deiraisa, Bittul b'shishim means 60 against 1, total of 61. Here, that it's midrabanan, 59 against 1, total of 60. You give them. Ketza. The Rambam wants you to chap that people read this, they don't chap what the Rambam is trying to say. He's trying to differentiate between the ratio. The kachal remains asur because you did not rip it open, and midrabanan you can't eat it because you didn't remove the milk. Everything else is mutter. Then everything is also. Now, obenkach means sai if you had the 60, sai if you didn't have. If now enough cheres oiser oisa umesharim b'shishim korishayna, because shakachal atzmoishin is bashal becomes a chaticha asura, because the milk is in the kachal. Now the ain mesharim by ela kameishu be'eshin is bashal. This is a very important klal. I know we're only learning it here by the kachal, but what's the rule? When you come to close to the ratio, and your mamish there, if it's going to be a little bit bigger, it's going to be better. A little bit smaller, it's going to be worse. You don't. The rabbi that's making the shishim estimation does not consider what is the size of when it fell in, even though that is when the problem was. That's not the way Yarav paskins. You have to look at the kachal now that's in front of the eyes of the judge. That is the size. I'll give you something similar when it comes to maras hatuma, right? By nida. So the shade of the dam mamish changes a bit, and that bit makes a big difference. The rule is the dayan looks at it the way it looks when it came to him. If not, it would not be shaykh to paskin. Okay. Halacha yudal. Another thing. So when we said in the beginning of Yud Beis that if you only ripped it open, then you're not even shasiba erev, then you can do tziliya. But you want for the milk to be removed. So when you're roasting it, so don't put it, if on the same spit you're putting 2 pieces of meat, he says, put it closer to the fire, not farther from the fire, but then
Rabbi,
mutter. Yes.
Does salting help for the udder, or is that not a thing?
No, because we're not removing blood. We have to get rid of the milk. Whole different thing. Very good. Halacha tezvav. Now we're moving on. Keva. Keva should be slabachal of shabbat, a different type of milk. An animal drank milk when it was living. And then you shechted the animal. It didn't digest it yet. If I taste, how do you view that? Muteres. Whatever is in the digestive tract is not considered what it used to be. It's viewed as already tenoifis. Because of the change that everything undergoes once it goes into our systems. Guys, not like Givina Sakum. The Rambam is going to show you the difference. Here, if you use the keva takashchuta, but could be this starter will impart flavor. It's going to be asura. By a goy's givina, if they would have used a keva from an animal that's not kosher, then it's a problem. I don't care if there's a tam or not. But since it's a davar amuter, in contrast, or of a treifa, or of a behemoth that's tameya, hoyel v'hamayimid itself is a davar asur. By itself, then that's ragivino mishum nevela, but mishum nevela, not because of basar v'cholov. And that's the reason, like we learned in Pei Gimel, that the Chazal made a separate gezerah, right? Bisman Chachni Mishnah, not to eat Gevinas Goyim, even though non-kosher milk does not coagulate. But the problem is with the starters. Halacha Yud Zayin.
But it is mutter to use the keva as a starter, right?
That's exactly what he says, as long as it does not impart flavor. So today they make sure it doesn't impart flavor. The ratio of milk is a lot. Very good. Says the Rambam, habasar levadoi muter. Hacholol levadoi muter. He's emphasizing something. When do they become asur midoraisa? Not only when they're mixed and when they're cooked. Only if they're cooked together. Now let's go. They weren't cooked together, but since both of them were hot, they cooked together. Or even shoinen l'toicham. If you remember, Chavra, normally Rav and Shmuel hilchas kerav be'isura, and from the very few exceptions is here we paskin like Shmuel by the machlekes lo gavar tata gavar. We taka paskin. The Rambam paskins here like Shmuel that what tata gavar. So even if that one that was on the top was cold, the dominant is the bottom one. If the bottom one was cham, it cooks. Avolam nafal echad mishneim. And the other one that's in the bottom is tzoinen, so therefore it didn't cook. Nevertheless, even though it didn't cook, still there is a mixture. So how do we get rid of that? That's called kedei klipa. You remove the surface of all of the meat that touched the milk, and you can eat the rest. That's because the top one was cham. What happens if both of them were tzoinen? All you need to do is madiach hachaticha. You just have to rinse it off. Lefikach mutar litzroid basar ugvina b'matpachas achas. You are allowed to put meat and milk in the same shopping bag and the same handkerchief, as long as they don't touch each other. And even if they touch each other, since everything is cold, that's not called a mixture. All you need to do is madiach habasar, madiach hagvina ba'oich. Right? Halach yudches maliach. Now, moliach, if something is salted, how salted? It has the din of hot. However, the Rambam gives a great example. Kutach is that mixture of moldy milk and moldy salt and moldy bread and moldy everything, and the Babylonians love it. It's salty, but it's not that salty. People eat it. Then it doesn't have a din kiroiseyach. Halacha yotes. Now, oif shachut, which is taka only lachatchila asur midrabanan, but it fell into chalav or to kutach that had chalav. So like this: if the bird is chai, raw, madichai umuter, right? Soinen and soinen, kutach is not moliach. Problem is, if it's tzili, then you have to be koil of it. And by the way, according to the Rosh, explicitly, even if the bird is tzoinen, but tzoinen. The point here is that meat of a bird, when it's saloi, absorbs. You got to take off kedei klipa. Either palachim, there's certain openings, or it was spiced up. And the nafal kutach, again, even though it's tzoinen, but tzoinen, then it's completely asur because it makes its way in. All right, halacha chav. Another din, can't eat on the same table oif and the gevina. Why? Because since to begin with, mixing him, even cooking is only midrabanan. people might end up sharing with each other. Even though Maacholos is only midrabanan, and normally it's like called a gzeira l'gzeira, here you cannot do it. I'll tell you, there's many darabanans. First of all, oif cooked with milk is midrabanan. Here, it's not even cooked. Still, don't even put it on the table. Now, you have two guests that don't know each other. They are allowed to eat on the same table without a heker. One even meat and one cheese, because since they're not acquainted, for people to share with each other, and you have to know how to apply to know when we say Hasidim and an ein mishpacha, I'll argue two Hasidim cannot eat on the table, even if they never met each other. They're going to meet each other right now. They know each other. The same bubbas. They went to the same place. Who knows what, where. So you got to be careful. Halacha chav beis.
Rabbi, what about making a hecker?
Oh, no. You can make it. That's good. The hecker is, the Rambam doesn't speak about it over here, like by Hilchos Nid. That's not called the same thing. Yeah, hecker for sure is okay. Halacha chav beis. Another din about not making milchik or fleishik breads without making a simon. Ein lashon asa'isa b'chalav, making it mamish a milchiks. And the imlash, call a pas asura, because people will hair galaveda. Shema yechalum bas. Same thing as on the opposite. Now he's not going to say mixing meat and bread. No one did it, but they would smear the oven with aliyah fat, which would make everything fleishiks. Don't do that. Vim shot call a pas asura. You can argue what's wrong. So it's fleishiks. No. You have to mamish kasha the oven. Shema yechal. You might eat these breads with chalav. However, ve'im shina b'tzuras hapas. Everyone is discernible. Everyone knows this is a milchiga bread, that's a fleishiga bread, and there's mamish no problem. Halacha gimel pasha for matzolim. All of it was baked together. Together, guys, it did not touch. But in the same time, they were in the oven, right? Reicha milsa, reicha lav milsa, dogon shitzalam im ha-basar. We say, since the tam of the basar permeated the loaf, it's not fleishiks, but you cannot eat it with chalav. Ka'ara sha'achlo b'basar. Now, unlike what we learned before, here we're learning it's a pot that has absorbed in it basar. Then you cooked in it dagim. Says the Rambam, oisam hadagim muter la'achlo b'kutach. This, again, we paskin like Shmuel, this is called not, but not the hetera. In other words, even though the tam of the basar went into the pot, nois and tam, and it's not in the veil of treifa chazer, it's muted, it's meat. Then the tam went from the walls back into the fish. So the fish has once removed, not direct from the meat. That is allowed to be eaten with milchiks. Halacha chav daled. Now let's go to a sakin. A sakin shachatach b'basar tzili. You use the knife to cut roasted meat, and guys, it's important that the meat meaning is hot. But it's annoying, and then you cut something that's very sharp. The mashal here is a radish. It doesn't have to be a radish. It can be from other sharp place, garlic, halachically, onions. Then, since you cut the tzunoin with the knife, you cannot eat any of the knife with kuta. Why? Because there's many things. First of all, we don't view it as nois and tam. We view a knife that some of the fats of the meat is on the knife. So it's not nois and tam only, it's mamoshes. Then, since the radish is sharp, we don't say that only the place that touched the knife is problematic. We say that since the radish or the onion, it absorbed the tam in all of it. None of it can be eaten with kutach. In contrast, if you use this knife, a knife is not like a keli that only has a belia issue. Like we said, knife has a problem that we say that there's shanunius on it, there's mamoshes on it. So if you cut kishus or after the meat, yes, there is some fat, but why will that fat get absorbed in all of the avatiach? It won't, it's cold. So all you need to do is go to mekayim, and you can eat the rest mamish with chalav. Gewaldig. Halacha chafein. Ein manichin kat shel melach. Guys, this is going to blow your mind. Yes.
Rabbi, in this halacha, Yaakov was asking, does that make you fleishik? if you ate the radish that fleshig grass, the guy was cut with the fleshig knife?
I don't think so. Halacha to check off, but I don't think. Halacha fe. Ein manichin kachel melech b'tzad kachel kamach. Guys, this will mamash blow your mind. You're not allowed to put a jar of salt near kutach. Why not? Even though there is walls of the kalim that are separating them. That's the power of salt. And derech, remember that? It goes through the walls of the kalim. So now what do you have? Now you have salt that's really milchitz. We're saying that there's going to be some tam of milchitz in the salt. But that's only salt. But you are allowed to put vinegar right near kamach is kutach. Okay, halacha vav. Now it goes gavaldik. Mi she'achal gevina, oy chalav, tchila. The Rambam is b'chlal not differentiating cheese, milk. Mutar la'echol achrav basar miyad, as long as there's no remains in your mouth of milchix. What do you need to do? So we are familiar today with the words kinuach and hadacha. The Rambam doesn't apply the way we apply. The Rambam is very lenient. The word yodiach leRambam is only on your hands. You have to wash your hands to make sure there's no, shamnunias of the cheese on your hands or milk on your hands. And kinuach, which means solids, for your mouth. V'yikanach piv. How do you today? By the way, brushing the teeth is really rinsing your mouth with water and solids, the toothbrush. But they didn't have toothbrushes. So they were makaneach their mouths by eating certain foods that would take everything off their teeth. The kaneach piv, between the gvina and the basar. The Rambam doesn't say you have to make separate su'udais. The Rambam doesn't speak about the waiting an hour. The Rambam just says hadacha of the hands, kinuach in the mouth. Ubamei yikaneach piv, either with bread or with fruits. Doesn't mean you have to swallow it. No, it's just about you chewing for things to move, to clear out the mouth. Either the only thing that may not be used is dates. People ate flour, however that worked, or vegetables, because they do not properly clean your mouth. Verstehst? That's how Yidden brush their teeth before they go to bed. I'm cleaning my mouth. They have a pedi. Truth is, it's not a bad idea. They say an apple does good stuff, but right. Okay, now. Okay, just to make it clear, Rashi argues. Rashi holds that hadacha. Remember, Rashi holds hadacha is the peh. We basket like Rashi. Okay, right. That you need kinuach and hadacha. That's when you're eating b'sar be'emoy chaya. After givina, after chalav. Listen to this. Since to begin with, even if you cook them together, it's only yasir midrabanan. You don't need kinuach hapen, you don't need netilas yadayim. And now the final halach is in the other direction. Misha achal basat atchilam, whether you ate b'sar behema or b'sar oif, which will only be a rabbanon, lo yoichal akrav chalav, ache yisha b'neim. The words of Chazal is kedei shir su'uda acheres. The time that you will spend in between meals. What time is that? Pascal's the Rambam 6 hours. Today in America, what's the time that you have to wait between meals? People wait between meals, I don't know, 15 minutes. But then no one says that. But here we Pascal 60, he's saying 6 hours. And the Rambam, the big machlokes Rishonim, if you remember these sugyas, is it because the food won't digest in your stomach? Is it because it's stuck in between your teeth? The Rambam says, by just doing kinuach, which means Rambam at least l'chumra in this aspect that if someone chewed meat, even though they didn't swallow it, Rambam you have to wait the 6 hours because of the basar shebein hashinayim. And another thing is that Rambam paskins the concept of 6 hours, and here you have others till today.
Right.
How long does Eno wait? Yeah.
According to Rambam, if you floss and brush your teeth, you can
we don't do that.
I know.
By the way, but Kevan, okay, you're saying good. What you're saying is logical, correct. Question is, does the Rambam exclude the other reason? And maybe the Rambam holds not only because it takes that time to digest, also because of Ben Hashinai, maybe that. And therefore, if you only chewed and didn't swallow, can there be a place that will say that today with the types of flossing, could be someone is going to argue that you can have If you didn't swallow only true, could be. Okay, Chevra,
And when he
final.
says kamoi sheishai,
Very good.
is that where they get the into the
Yeah,
6 hour
yeah.
opinion from? Because
Thank you, Danny. In the 6th hour. In the 6th hour. 5 hours and a bit. Okay. Perek Yud is changing topics, but not completely. Well, it's Atkan. We learned 9 chapters all about products that come from living beings. Now we're moving on to the world of agriculture, even though, as the Rambam himself will say, many halachas will be learned in their place of trumais and maisras, etc. But anything that's going to be basically usher across the board will at least get its mention here in Perek. It's a huge Perek. We're going to learn about the Isur of Chadash, the Isur of Kilei HaKerem to a certain degree, the Isur of Arla, the Isur of Neter Avoy, which is really an extension of Arla, and the Isur of Tevel. Perek Yud has 24 halachas, Dr. Rambam halacha out. Kol Isurim Shomanu, meaning in the past 9 chapters, we're all b'minei nefesh chaya. However, Zolstovisin, don't think that everything that grows in the earth is azay kosher to eat right away. Nisht, v'yesh Yisurim acherim shom tchayra b'zer haaretz. The Rambam says, Chadash, Kilei HaKerem, Arla, and Tevel, Stam Loha'ir. The Rambam really is going to also add Neter Avoy, but Loha'ir doesn't mention it here because Arla's for the first 3 years, and Ba'aretz, you add another year. Okay. Halacha based on this order. HaChadash, what's the Isur of Chadash? It's very simple. Any one of the 5 grains, wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats, Asur le'echol me'HaChadash aloi, until Koydem sheyikrav ha'omer, prior to the omer carbon being brought in the holy temple on the Mizbeach on the 6th day of Nisan, as it says, Beferish and Parshas Emor, neither lechem, which is bread, koli is roasted kernels, or caramel fresh kernels, none of them may be eaten. Chol kizayis, here's the shiur, chadash, before the omer was brought, like in Torah. You know where? Says the Rambam, b'chol makayim b'chol zman, meaning bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz, bein bifnei abayis, bein shaleif bifnei abayis. Ella, the only difference is, this man, when we have a base on Mikdash, what's matir chadash, the bringing of the omer? So if they brought the omer 10 a.m., and you're there in Yerushalayim, you can eat it from right afterwards. People that didn't live in Yerushalayim and there was no, live cameras, they didn't know exactly when they brought the omer. Since Kaihanim are quick, we know for sure by midday they brought it. However, Bisman she'ein Mikdash, now we added, remember that? Kolayim kuli asur min ha'toira. Kolayim kuli asur min ha'toira. So paskins the Rambam. Furthermore, that b'mekoyim moishe oisin shnei yamin. So the Rambam says Chadash is asur kol yoim shiva asur benisan ad la'erev. That's a huge chiddush. Takam divrei seifrim, because now we have a calendar. But prior to that, what we call the 16th, right? When we make a seder, why are we making a seder? Because maybe it's the 15th. So then you add another whole day. Halacha Gimel. Ha'oichel, either lechem or koli, or all 3. It's separate. It's separate lavin. Because the Torah specifies lechem, koli, v'kamal yisayich. Sometimes when it's all included in one lav, you're not machalik the lav. And here we have an old tradition. That's what Hashem meant in this pasuk. Halacha dal. Now let's go into details. You can plant. There's taking root. So that's the key factor. If these grains took root prior to the bringing of the omer, even though it wasn't fully ready to be harvested, it only got, the gamar was only after the reading of the omer. I don't care, because muteres v'achil shgar omer. However, through a shishisha, after shgar of omer, even though you planted it, it's not about the planting, it's about the ashrashah. Didn't say now we're going to have a boya that lo yifshat in the Gemara. What happens? Listen to this case. Therefore, where are we up to? We're up to that it's only going to become mutter next omer. Okay, you harvest it. Prior to the next omer, you replanted it. The key is that it did not take root prior to the next year. But you can argue, I know it didn't take root, But so therefore, it's not new, it's the old. If it's the old, is well, it already went over an oimer. Do we say on one hand, since it didn't take root yet, which was the reason why it's going to be muted, because once you plant it in the ground, it's like azriya chadosha. You didn't take root, now it's a new thing. If you didn't wait for it to take root, you undug it. Ain't no like you keep on, whenever you have a suffix, whether you violate it, since it's a by the leifshita, that was the thing we had today in the first chapter, you're not going to be chayv malchus, but you're going to get malchus mardus because you suffix, you violated the doirais. And the same thing will be if you have a sheboilis, you have a stalk of grape. In other words, if you would have left it in the ground, it would have been permitted. You uprooted it, and now you planted it again. It's not a seed, but it's a stalk. And now another part grew out. How do you view that part? And therefore you would have to wait until Oimer Abba. Because since his shrisha koydem ha'omer, so we say that all that which grew from the ikit. So once the ikit is mutter, the extension is mutter. But maybe not. Maybe the extension came because you replanted. So that doubt is lo yifshut. Same halacha, don't eat it. If you eat it, you makas mardus. Halacha vav is, yes.
Right. What's the whole reason? If it's a deraisa, why is it that today almost nobody is machmir?
Because you have some opinions that hold that it's not deraisa, it's the rabbana. There is the one shita that holds it's midrabanan, that it's not midrabanan, that it's not noig b'chutz laretz. The Alter Rebbe paskin on that shita. Many people argue that if the Alter Rebbe would have known that even the Zerua also was machmer, he would have been machmer. The Alter Rebbe paskins like the one das yachid that it's only noig ba'aretz. As simple as that. When Rabbi Taber was teaching us, he gave his theory. This is not a lamah. He said that since people were very poor and they cannot afford, it was a big financial burden not being able to eat, or there was hunger. So in such circumstances, he was soymech on a das yachid. Bottom line is, yesh makilim, but we're learning Rambam. The Rambam holds it's mamash asa dorais. Halacha vav. Halacha vav is moving on to kilei akerim. Now, guys, here we go. Min tevua. Any of the 5 grains or any of vegetables. Remember what we're learning here. We're going to learn kilei akerim later in the Rambam. Shenizru imagefen, if they were planted together with a vine, doesn't matter who did the planting, benches at Yisrael, benches at Agoy, or whether it planted by itself, by the Oiber directly, or which either direction, or the opposite. You planted a geffen inside a vegetable patch. Shneim asurim ba'achila u'bahano'ah. Shnema, that's the meaning of the pasuk of Kiseitze. Pentigdash hamaleya hazera ashetizru tuas akerem. Lest it become kadosh, meaning you will have to distance yourself from it, meaning asur b'achila and asur b'hano'ah. Now, for the record, we are learning Maacholos asuros. Very important. We'll review this. We'll repeat this when we get to kilei akerim. We're learning not about the isur of zriya. We're learning about the isur of achila. In Hilchas kilei akerim, Yadua the Rambam holds that you're only chayev for zriya ad sheyizra chita and the soira and achadza the mapoilas yad. We'll explain that later. No, it's to be chayev for planting. Many more conditions have to be met. What we are learning now, which is a big chumrah, that any grain or any vegetable with only one vine, even if you didn't plant it, that's Maacholos asuros. You can't eat it, and also aser bano. Very good. Allah chazai. Hoichel kazayis mikilei akerim. Beimin ayerek, beimin anovim. Loikim and atoyim. And furthermore, both of them are mitzdarif. You don't have to have from each. Halacha ches. Amed varam amurim. Oh, shenizru beretz Yisrael. But when it comes to chutz la'aretz, eating of kilei akerim is only also midrabanan. Ubehilchas kalayim yizbar eizem min also mikilei akerim. Ve'eizem min eino asur ve'eichye asur or masei asur Be'ezad davar mekadesh, be'ezad davar ein mekadesh. A lot more in Hilchos Kli Yakerim. Halacha Tes goes on to the next issue of Arla. Ha'arla keitzad kol anatea ilan Michael. When you plant a fruit tree, kol peidah she'oisa ilan shalosh shana mishenizra. Harei heim asurin. Also, both bachila and ba'anaz. It says in Kedoshim shalosh shanim yilachem areilim lo yiachel. And here also shiurim. If you eat the kazayis, you're like, just for the record, you don't know how to. You have to learn how to count to 3 years. We'll learn this later in the Rambam. Not the way you think. You planted it today. You count 3 bachlalna. There was the beginning of the count that's connected to how earlier prior to Rosh Hashanah that you planted. There was the end of the year, which has to do with Tu B'Shvat. But we're just learning general. Halacha Yud. As it says, Kisuvay La'aretz. Avol Isur Arla B'chutz La'aretz. Guys, important. The Rambam holds it's Asur D'Oraisa, but as a Halacha L'Moshe Sinai. Can I tell you something interesting? Whenever something is Asur, as a Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, you won't get Malchus. Violated the D'Oraisa, you're not going to get Malchus. It's not written in the Torah Laf. Shavadai Ha'arla B'chutz La'aretz Asura. And you know what? You know what's part of the Halacha L'Moshe Sinai? Part of the Halacha L'Moshe Sinai is that a suffix Arla B'chutz La'aretz is muter. Now, what about a suffix?
Yes. Rabbi, is that why we're allowed to buy fruits in the supermarket?
No, you don't even need that. You can buy fruits because it's a roif. You go after roif. We're going to learn crazy leniencies when it comes to chutz la'aretz. Mamish, Yud Aleph. Suffix Arla B'Kilei Akerim. Eretz Yisrael Asur. And Danny, 1 second. Suffix doesn't mean parish. But let's go. Obesurya, which is kibush yachid, the artzes shukavash David muter. Now more details. Keitzad, hoyo kerem. In other words, you have a vineyard, and in there you know there's arla. That's kerem arla. And grapes are being sold outside of the vineyard. Take out the letter vav, which is probably a mistake, and now or. Or, right, there's a yerek that's planted in a kerem, and we learned above that is asur b'achila, and the yerek, that's the key, is being sold outside the vineyard. Now, did it come from that? Shema mimenu huzeh, shema miachar. You buy outside the vineyard. No, maybe it came from another place. B'surya muter. Wow. And now even more, this is going to be amazing. You have to get used to this idea. In Chutz La'aretz, even if you know, you know it came from here, you know it came from the vineyard, you can buy them as long as you did not see the guy picking it off the tree. So in Surya, we don't do. You have to have at least a doubt. Maybe it came from another place, which is highly unlikely. We're very lenient. Halacha Yud Beis. Kerem, the whole kerem is a suffix arla suffix kalayim. That is Yisrael Asur. Another application. Ubesurya muter. Even though the Rambam is saying chutz la'aretz, Isur Arla is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai is to be lenient in all of these cases. Another case. Chavi Yisyayin and says to Munah B'Pardesh Allah. Why would someone hide it there? So our presumption is that a ganav stole it and he's hiding it here. So it didn't come from here. So therefore, mutaras bahana. I got stuck here until some are goydes. Look at the Lechem Mishnah. He says it mutaras b'shasiya umutaras bahana. That no, it's once you say since it's hidden, it means a ganav, and a ganav is not going to steal from here to hide it here. A ganav steals from another place to hide here. So based on that, it's taken muta not only banot, but in drinking as well. That's only when it comes to the barrel of wine. Because here we say shema misham nilkatu b'tzniim sham. That's already common for people to harvest and them to put it aside in the same location. Barrels are not hidden. That's like it's evident that it was a stolen product. Halacha Yudalit. Goy v'yisrael shayishutafim minatiyam. Don't forget, you can't even have hana'ah. We're having something very similar to what we had on Hilchos Shabbos. So, first 3 years, the guy will work, the guy will have hana'ah. Whatever he wants to do. The next 3 years, the Jew will work, the Jew will take it. That's what Harizemut means the Yid is not having hana'ah from Allah. The guy is working and the guy is having hana'ah from his 3 years. The Jew is working, they're partners. They're not exchanging anything. It's like shutfis on Shabbos. If you make a Tanai mitchila, it's allowed. The guy works on Shabbos and he has that one. Problem is, if they didn't make such a Tanai, which means really everything belongs to everyone. Now we're making as a exchange. I'm going to give you my part of the Arla for you to give me your part in the next 3 years. That's called Hana from Arla. Ubelvad, meaning even when they made that Tanai from the beginning when it's mutter, but they cannot make a cheshbon. It's whatever grows the first 3 years is fully the guys, no matter how much. You can't say, if that was the type of condition that they should always end up with exact the same amount of money or fruits, that's awesome. That's called they're being machloek, they're making an exchange. The heter is 3 years yours no matter what, the next 3 years mine no matter what. And afterwards 50-50, whatever they want. Halacha tezvav. Yeroli says the Rambam, she'ein din neter avoy loy b'chutz la'aretz at all. Ela oichel peiroi shana revius beloy pidyon klal. Shaloi omru, the halacha l'meishu Sinai was only for the Arla. And the Rambam says, v'kavu chavirat dvorim, Masuria, which is chayv in Meises and Shvius midivreim, ein chayeves v'neter avoy, as the learn lechas Meises Sheni. So that's the Rambam's raya. Chutz la'aretz like kol shein. Shaloi neter avoy noigboy. But the Eretz Yisrael, now here we go. Noyeg ben b'fnei abayis, ben shaloi b'fnei abayis. V'hoiru mixas go'oinim, shekerem revoi, levadoi, only kerem. They differentiated. They didn't agree with the Rambam. They said that the kerem needs opinion, and only then could it be eaten. And the Rambam says, "Ve'ein l'dover ze'ikir." Why would we make such a difference? Halacha tezayin. Peidah shana levias kula. Also, like the Rambam says, Be'eretz Yisrael, the Rambam is saying that because we don't yet have a Beis Hamikdash. If not, you go and have it in Yerushalayim. And also, like we mentioned, how to count the years is not so simple. Okay, Yudzayin, how do you redeem it? Some details will be given over here. And that's very important. Big difference, because Bisman Hazeh, you may not eat it regardless. So since you may not eat it, the pidyon is only to remove the Kedusha part of it. Whenever you only have to deal with the Kedusha part of it, the financial part is not taken into account. So first you make a bracha, and then you redeem all of it. On what? Even on only one pruta. By making a declaration, wow. And by the way, to be Maacholos shava mother, the pruta is lachatchila muter because you cannot eat it anyways. And now that pruta has to be destroyed. Or you can be Maacholos shava pruta miperes acherois, or you can be Maacholos on food and burn the food. Then just get rid of that. It's after you played it, you can have the fruit. Still, you have to wait until Shana Chamishis, and the Rambam completely rejects that. Another thing, it's going back that you have to wait. Since the Torah writes, that's what God means. That on the 5th year, what grows doesn't mean chulin. And not that even after you appointed the 4th, you only can eat it on the 5th, and therefore halacha you test. Moving on, right to the final topic of this chapter, tevel. What's tevel? Kol oichel shuchai v'menu shuchai v'hapish v'menu trumas, as we're going to learn, right, in trumas u'maisres. So the din is, prior to you removing trumas u'maisres, the produce is called tevel. V'aso lechel mimenu, as it says in Emor lo yichalu es kochi b'nei Yisrael eis asher yorimu lashem, meaning lo yinahagu b'minag chulin, because there's kochim that still, kochim here means truma. Shazin only tanu v'lo yom. Now, what happens if somebody eats a kazayis of devil prior to separating truma gedol and truma smaiser? So here, the din is chayev misa bidei shamayim. How? Because it says v'lo yechalalu es kachi b'nei Yisrael. So if you remember, guys, we learned this together. Chilul, right? If a tamei eats trumato hoira, the Torah says that umeisu boy ki yechalalu misa b'dei shamayim. So that's the pasuk that Rambam is bringing is from the words v'lo yechalalu. He expects us to remember this Gezerah Shav. Halacha chaf. Aval hoichal midavar shenit lo mimenu truma gedol. Truma somaiser. He didn't fully tithe it, but you removed it, the kachim part of it, even though badayin litre shemenu maisves. I feel it in shemenu maiser ani. Hareza loike from eating tevel, but vein by misa. Was before you get malchus and mis. She'ain of a misa elam trumas maiser. Because of the words v'lo yichal was kache b'nei Yisrael. You can only say kache to trumas maiser. Halacha chafalach. Well, malchus you have to have a warning. Hazara lo oichel tevel shaliur memeno maisas bechlal. Shenemar lo yisuchal lechol b'sherecha maisas begancha. That includes not eating tevel. Vilchas trumas maisas is barred. Eizadav chayv truma maisas. Eizadav prat. Which one is chayv in Atoida? Which one is chayv in Divrei Seifrim? There's so many different opinions. Oichel kezayis mitevel shel divrayim. Oy mikila yakerem. That Rama means chevra kila yakerem b'chutz la'aretz. And our love chutz la'aretz, even though it's halacha l'meishim Sinai, but we mentioned halacha l'meishim Sinai is not a love. You're not chayv malchus midoraisa, but always ma kenoisa makas mardos. Now let's go to juices. Halacha chav beitz, hatevo, or chadash, or hegdish, svichei shvius, kalaim and arlo. We're gonna learn every one in more details. Point is, any product which may not be eaten. So the rule is that whenever you eat something that's called shaloi kiderach achilasai, right? You won't get malchus. Mashkin ha'yitz miperisayim take asurim kamaisam, but you're not going to get malchus. Shaloi kiderach achilas. What's the only exception by Chazal for certain products that were meant for their juice? Famous the yayin and the shemen, whether it's of arlo, kili akerem. Maybe orange
juice also, no?
Maybe now, yeah. Okay, correct. No, and that's why I mentioned the reason that I'm saying it is because it's considered then halacha chav gimel. The Rambam is saying, hold on, why didn't they speak about other isurim of kachim? And we call them shol toirehim. Isurim sheish machilas trumos ubikurim v'chalo ma'aser sheni. Then you have Yisurim of Kachim Mizbeach, Pigol Noisim V'Tomei. The Rambam says these will be expounded more in their place. And halacha, final halacha, Bashir, Kol Achilom Yam Kizayis, Beil Malchus Ben Lakaris. And Krabiano, Isur Chametz V'Pesach, V'dina B'chas Chametz V'Matzah. The Rambam is trying to explain why doesn't he mention these over here? Avol Isur Achilom Yam Kippurim, Einoi Isur Min B'Fnei Atzma. It's a different type of prohibition. And likewise, the Isur of any product that comes from grapes for a nazir is not something that shava bakoil, and therefore Yisbar Isur Kalecha Mehem V'Shura V'Dinov V'Mekoymai Haraoloi. I'm not here in Maacholos asuros. Tomorrow we're going to begin with Yayin Nesach, and actually that will take up all three chapters about Yayin, about Negia. It's going to be Freilach, God willing, to be continued. Shkoyach. So I couldn't get on. Someone will see Daniel Hassan. I couldn't get on YouTube, but we have the Zoom. All right. Tomorrow at the same time, Chadra. First of all, I might be back, a small chance, but I might only come back a little bit later Wednesday. All right.